From Chicago, welcome to 3Degrees Discussions. I'm your host, Mike Vasquez.
That was a learning experience trying to get a service provider to build my part in metal. That was a learning experience on its own because I was so surprised, working in additive, being, knowing all of the lingo and then contacting like the service providers that I see at the trade shows who are like, let's do a project. And I sent them this like geometry that was just like so wildly different. And I got a lot of really, really negative responses from people that really shaped my perspective of like when the right time to go to a metal 3D printing service provider would be.
That's Danny Levy. Danny's currently an Advanced Manufacturing Technologist for a stealth startup. He has great insights on design for additive manufacturing, and we discussed some of his approaches to designing for the technology and perspectives from inside the trenches of 3D printing machine operation. Thanks for coming on, Danny. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks for having me. Super fun to do a podcast with you and talk about my experiences. My name is Danny Levy, for if we didn't catch it, but I've been in additive for about 7 years. By way of kind of the startup entrepreneurship community. I had recently, graduated college. I was figuring out what I was going to do. I went to school here in Chicago for industrial design at Columbia College, and I had always been really passionate about design, and through school, had explored a lot with digital fabrication. And I ended up joining a startup that was coincidentally co-founded by a buddy of mine who he had dropped out of DePaul's entrepreneurship program. He was part of the MakerBot community and had teamed up with some other folks here in Chicago and did this little mini 3D printing service bureau, which is actually how I think we met. We had a farm of MakerBots and also an EOS P-Series machine. And just kind of like threw myself into it, learned by doing. It was a wild experience. Anyone that's done a startup kind of knows how that can go. It can be great and exciting, and it can go catastrophically wrong at some points. And, the team, we were all, in our early 20s running a business and learned things the hard way. And yeah, so I think, Mike, didn't we meet each other? Like I had given you some powder from our EOS machine.
That's right. I think that was the first time.
I remember at the time being so worried about it. We didn't know what to do with all of our dead powder. It was like we were stashing it in the back. I was like Googling like what to do with with nylon powder. Needless to say, I didn't stay at that startup, and but what I was doing was like creating a lot of educational content, and that's something that I recognized early on was like winning customers was less about like your product specifically and more about like educating them about what you can do. And I took that and I was making all sorts of content for STEM and about 3D printing, doing meetups. So I spent some time just like working with schools. I did a little bit of work with Duke University's talent identification program, which is like a STEM camp on steroids kind of a thing. And it was great, but I quickly realized that what I knew about 3D printing could be much more applicable in, for commercial businesses. And so I ended up taking a position with Fisher Unitech, which is now CATI, in an application engineering role. And yeah, we had met at M Hub, where I had navigated a partnership for a couple of years, and yeah, so the commercial additive manufacturing scene is really where I think I honed my skills, learned what it's all about in terms of being a provider of 3D printers, of commercial 3D printers. We were distributing Stratasys 3D printers, and they had a number of other technologies under their product lineup.
Yeah.
And so yeah, now I'm working with a multitude of digital manufacturing technologies back in the startup world, in the energy sector. So I went from being a complete noob to being an expert, which I'm doing quotations around that because I always feel weird calling myself an expert. And now I'm an end user.
One of the reasons I really enjoy talking to you, Danny, is that you have this really thorough understanding of both how the process works and operating the machine, maintaining the machine, but also the superb design understanding that allows you to communicate to customers in a way that as almost a translator to help explain how the technology works, but then how you should really leverage it in real life applications.
Yeah, it's specifically with people who haven't gone from start to finish. I think that there's a lot of challenges. Whether it's someone ordering parts, that's one thing. Talking to an engineer that just kind of sees maybe the cost of a part, and they think about it just being plastic or maybe metal, whatever it is. Um, or even from like a organization level. I mean, I get called up by friends of mine who have been asked to investigate technology on behalf of their company, and they don't know anything, and it's just there's so many small details that they need to understand before they really can, um, I guess, just like quantify a solution. And yeah, it goes from the top to the bottom of any organization, and that's why anytime you talk to someone who's like run a machine, been involved in like a parts business or selling machines or like whatever it is, there's kind of this like instant recognition that there's this like shared knowledge and you don't have to explain as much about it.
Over the time that you've been in the additive industry, have you seen the understanding of the end user or customers that you were working with improve or change through their design questions and parts that they were submitting?
That's it's interesting because in many ways I want to say yes, but I'm also like more involved in the 3D printing community than I ever have been before. So it's like, for instance, there's a big community of people posting on LinkedIn, and the knowledge is there, but then on other social media platforms, like Instagram, which I have a page that I post proper additive manufacturing content to. There really is a disconnect, I think, between the 3D printing enthusiast community and the additive manufacturing community, specifically on the internet, also physically, because um, the the understanding of the collection of technologies I just don't think is there when it comes to like enthusiasts. Just they have hobbyist machines, they have prosumer machines or DIY machines that they've built, and they're super knowledgeable people. But if you started talking about DMLS or DED, or even I guess like multi-jet fusion has had pretty good penetration across the board. But when it comes to like the more niche areas of additive manufacturing, like the knowledge probably isn't there for people who aren't necessarily like in the additive manufacturing the small circle of people that we were talking about.
We were a bit spoiled at AdHub in the sense that we got to see one of every type of polymer system. We had FDM and SLS and PolyJet. And I think one of the challenges I face is for people that are jumping technologies from FDM to SLS or vice versa, is getting them to understand how the processes differ and how you might design differently for each process, including supports and other considerations.
Yeah, that's certainly a tricky thing because it's like I always try to avoid, even when I was involved in like selling commercial 3D printing systems. I tried to like maintain being technology agnostic. I tried to not sound like a salesperson. I was trying to avoid all those things. But when it comes to explaining the technology, sometimes it's good to just like stick with the cliches that you hear from the equipment manufacturers. Like I hate hearing when people describe fused deposition modeling as like, well, it's just a glue gun. It's like it's kind of irritating to hear, but at the same time, like that's what clicks in people's heads. So yeah, like having those visual references kind of, I think, helps avoid the cliches of describing 3D printing technology that, helps people just have that aha moment, I guess.
It's also been really interesting to see how the numerous technology platforms has impacted the real life applications that have evolved through the COVID pandemic with face shields and PPE and ventilators, and how all those kind of technologies or fast fabrication platforms can really help in an effort like that.
Yeah, no, totally. It's almost like an unintended consequence of what's been happening, where the call for fabrication as it relates to filling voids in the supply chain has led many people who wouldn't necessarily be investigating that type of stuff to look into the technology. And I mean, I was on the phone with all sorts of people within my network when COVID was really ramping up in the United States and in Chicago about, hey, we want to get this made. And they're just like, well, we were going to print it on an Ultimaker or whatever. And I was like, well, here's why you might not want to do it on an Ultimaker, or something along those lines. And again, it could have been for something very low fidelity, but it could also be for stuff that are high fidelity as well. And I guess it's I'm glad that I could help people out, and I hope that when it comes to 3D printing or just even manufacturing in general, that people have easier access to the people that can lead them to the right solution. Because when it comes to anything healthcare related, I think that it requires an approach that may not just be exporting it and printing it. Like there should be some consideration of, is this the right tool for the job? Is this the right material for the application? Is what I'm doing gonna do more help than harm? And there's, I firsthand saw a handful of scenarios like that. So
Yeah. Was there a particular use case that always popped up with your work with Fisher Unitech? Was it prototyping, Json Fixtures, kind of custom models? Was there something that kind of always came up in terms of the work you were doing?
Well, we're in the Midwest, right? So we're smack dab in the middle of good old manufacturing of jigs and fixtures. I mean, that was what we were talking about all day. And I have a bunch of friends that we're kind of in the realm of application engineering, and we'd always joke about jigs and fixtures and how it's not a sexy application, but it's what sells. And so I don't know. I'd say that like jigs and fixtures and things that are very like literal manufacturing aids, and that definitely expanded into, like tooling stuff that may have been a little bit more exciting, but for the most part, it's pretty cut and dry. So that was like what we would see the most of, and I like I had said, I went to school for industrial design, and I've always been like a design nerd, and not necessarily as much of an engineer, which was funny that I like found my way into an engineering role. But it was just like I found myself, it was hard to get excited about it, and that led me
Not too many lattice designed jigs and fixtures for lightweighting.
Yeah, it's like you go and you like look at what's happening in 3D printing on the internet, and you see all these like super cool like topology optimization of like Bentley's, brakes and aerospace components, all this stuff, and then you're talking to a guy from like a small like mom and pop shop about like some prismatic fixture with like holes in it, and you're just like, oh man. But yeah, that did navigate me to focus on stuff that I do care about, which is certainly like addressing the bigger problems. And being in Chicago, we have a really good network of hospitals here, and I found myself working with them. And intraoperative 3D printing for pre or intraoperative evaluation was something that was picking up traction. And
That's the idea of taking a scan of somebody and converting to a model.
Yeah. And a lot of the scan to 3D printing stuff, or other aspects. I mean, there's a number of healthcare OEMs, in Michigan and in Ohio, and some here in Illinois that were making medical devices. And so I would say that was probably like the next thing that we saw a lot of. It was like jigs and fixtures, healthcare stuff, and then I guess the number 3 was probably like consumer packaged goods and packaging. And that stuff was also pretty engaging, just because you see products on the shelf, and then when you're like involved in something related to helping that company optimize it, it was like, oh, like I know this product. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah. And one of the other things that we always talk about over the year is kind of the annual AMUG show. And I know although this year didn't happen, you were getting more and more involved in the group as a whole as well, right?
Yeah, definitely gotta plug AMUG as best as I can. The Additive Manufacturing User Group. I've been working with the marketing committee, just kind of taking some of my technical skills to try to help them create content. It is unfortunate that this past year, had to get postponed like the way it did, but all for the right reasons. But that community has become just is at the core of why I really love 3D printing, because I think that it made me realize that I had finally gone from just being this like enthusiast to someone that was a part of a broader community of people who had pretty similar perspectives in terms of the technology and how it can kind of transform industries and change the way that we're working. So that was cool. My first year at that conference, just realizing that it was something way bigger than I had originally known it to be.
Yeah, and even last year you had, is last year the first time you've entered the design portion of it, or have you done multiple entries to that?
Oh, yeah. Last year was the first year that I entered the the technical competition, which they have, they have two different ones. Yeah, and that is just growing. That's I thought that there was going to be like 3 or 4 applicants. I thought that I had it in the bag. And yeah, there's a whole room of people that entered the finishing competition and the technical design competition, and it's continuing to grow. So that was really fun.
Yeah, and you redesigned was it a guitar or a bass? Or I can't
Yeah,
remember. Yeah.
is
Yeah.
a guitar head,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's actually right here next to me. It was a long project in the making, but it was, a guitar from the 1960s is my father's guitar, and it had cracked down the center of the head, and I lost the other piece. I don't know where it went, so I scanned it, and I did a whole involved workflow of reverse engineering and lattice work, topology optimization, and kind of made it into this Terminator looking attachment. And it took me a long time. I actually finished the project like 100% just last week. I got it metal 3D printed finally. And you know, I had to learn how to. The most challenging part for me was learning how to drill and tap screw holes. So embarrassing, but yeah. So it plays, and I got to take some good pictures and post too because it looks pretty cool.
Yeah, I remember seeing at the competition. I was really impressed. I probably saw it before the competition too, but it was really, really impressive.
Yeah, that was just the nylon. I just got that laser sintered in nylon though, and
Yeah,
everyone was like, I think that was the problem. People saw it in nylon, they're like, oh, like nylon. It's so. I mean, nothing against nylon 12, right? It's like the go-to
it doesn't
prototyping
have the
plastic,
same
but
cachet as
yeah,
titanium. Or,
yeah, and man, that was a learning experience trying to get a service provider to build my part in metal. Um, that was a learning experience on its own because I was so surprised, working in additive, being, knowing all of the lingo and then contacting like the service providers that I see at the trade shows who are like, let's do a project. And I sent them this like geometry that was just like so wildly different. And I got a lot of really, really negative responses from people that really shaped my perspective of like when the right time to go to a metal 3D printing service provider would be. It was
in
kind
what
of
ways? Like it was too complex. They didn't want to clean it, or didn't want to
um
support it, or
yeah, so like one right out of the gate, they took it as like an art project, and they had just like negative. They're like, well, we don't really work with artists, and I'm like, well, I'm not really an artist. Like, I'm an application engineer at a company that like you already work with. So there was that, but then yeah, I think like from a risk perspective, they looked at the design that had lattice structures and just not a lot of non-prismatic geometry, and from a risk standpoint they're just like, we're gonna no quote this. And I was just like bummed out because like I did the optimization. All my optimizations were done in the direction of intended, the intended build direction. So like everything was a 45, at least a 45-degree angle. I had done like all sorts of just analysis that would qualify it to be built in out of metal 3D printing. Granted, I don't run metal 3D printer or like laser DMLS systems, right? But they just were like, it's just too much risk for us.
just have to
Um,
call it a jig.
yeah, I should have just renamed the file, and I should have tried to make it seem like I came from like a big Fortune 100 company. I think that was the other part of it, was that like initially I emailed people from like my personal Gmail, and that's always like a indicator of like, well, that's not a repeat customer. And um, I don't know. I stopped trying to fight it. I did get some quotes. They were like wildly expensive. I'm like running all the numbers on the back end. I'm like, well, this is the volume. This is how much material it's going to use. I can make some basic assumptions on the cost, but at the end of the day, I just went through an online service bureau. Actually, I tried through. I think at first I tried to get it through iMaterialize, and it took them like 2 weeks to tell me that they were going to refund it. And then I went through Shapeways, and they refunded it once, and then I resubmitted it, and like it went through. So hey, got it done, right?
There you go. Awesome. And I guess from kind of your experience with AMUG and kind of coming out as an industrial designer, do you have advice for kind of people that you're talking to in the mechanical engineering space or material space, or just people interested in additive? How do you think they should kind of start their career path?
Yeah, I've gotten asked that a couple times, especially, I was listening to the podcast that you did with Federico, and I had collaborated with him for some of his with some of his students, and they asked me the same question. And I think it depends on like where your education is, and then like where you're trying to go. For me, I think that my entrance into the industry through the startup world really helped me in that, like, I was prepared to just do anything that I would admit that I don't know how to do something, but I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to figure it out. And I think that if more people took that approach instead of, I don't know how to do something, so I need to be shown how to do it, or I need to go like explicitly learn it before I can pass this point. Like if they kind of change their mindset to just kind of learn by doing it, be okay with making the mistakes, that you can just accelerate much faster. And if you're coming from the realm outside of engineering, like for me it was just learning the lingo, so I could communicate with people. I mean, most of the work that I'm doing in additive relates to communication, not necessarily hard engineering. And so for students, they certainly need to sharpen their communication skills just as much as their like technical knowledge. So yeah, I think that's like my general starting point with people, and try to differentiate yourself, like learn something that you're not seeing people within 3D printing doing, because that can certainly be applied. And I mean, I think that we're seeing a lot of that in software. I mean, software development was kind of the neglected component in 3D printing for such a long time, and now we're seeing an absolute explosion of software focused companies. So
and do you like the idea you've done? Well, this is what, your second startup or second or third startup that you're in now? Do you like what's the advice on starting with a startup? Which I'm guilty of that too. So
yeah, well, I'll say that when I got out of the first one, I swore I would never do one ever again. It's got to come from passion, though. Like the reason why I got back to it was because it was something that I felt very, very attached to. And a little bit about it, like I'm involved at a hard science startup in Chicago, and we're in stealth mode, so I do have to be a little bit vague and omit the juicy details. But our primary focus is creating a high energy density flow battery to meet transportation needs. And there's a lot of challenges in the electrification of vehicles, and it's something that I've always been. I grew up in Metro Detroit, was a car nut growing up, in many ways still am, and I always felt really passionate about it. And looked at GM when they were doing the fuel cell skateboard concept, and looked at hybrids when they started emerging, and just being like, yes, like here are some real solutions for problems in our world. And I guess, a decade's gone by and I'm still like, where are those solutions for the problems? And so that's what really got me back into the startup world, is the right team and the right environment and the right problem that I felt really passionate about. Because if it's something that you care about, it doesn't feel like work, and you can get kind of that sense of satisfaction from what you're doing, and it feels like it's making an impact. So.
For sure.
And you got to be a bit crazy too. Like, got to be a bit crazy.
That's certainly true. And as we wrap up here, appreciate the time, but can you tell us more about your Instagram page?
Oh yeah, so it's a bit of a pause right now, but I have like a whole bunch of content that we're gonna jump back into soon. It's called Technologically Woke, technologically_woke, and yeah, the idea was to connect the the fresh 3D printing community on Instagram and on the internet that love desktop printing, love kind of the homegrown 3D printing movement that happened, and get them connected with what's happening in proper additive manufacturing by taking all of the photos that I've aggregated from shows, from taking tours of facilities, and diving into the parts and how they're made and why they look and function the way they function. Because I really want to take the kind of DIY community that I came from, that got me charged up about 3D printing, and get it to merge with kind of, I guess, the more AMUG crowd, the Additive Manufacturing User Group crowd, because this is something that has to continue growing if our industry is going to make up more than a fraction of a percent of manufacturing as a whole. So we got to get more people plugged in, and kind of due diligence for the knowledge transfer for the future of 3D printing and manufacturing as a whole.
Yeah, I love that idea. I'm really glad that you're doing that, because it has, I mean, there is elements of that kind of division, so to speak, of the two different parts of 3D printing. So I think there's so much opportunity in design and sharing the knowledge and giving people access to seeing what's possible. I think that's fantastic.
Well, thanks for saying that. That's got me charged up. So I'm going to be pushing forward with it. So looking forward to posting more content then.
Appreciate the conversation today, Danny, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to listening to more podcasts.